As the predecessor to Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, the ancient state of Rus was also a formidable power. Its leader, Prince Oleg, once hung his shield on the walls of Constantinople as a declaration of his conquest of that place. If you're skeptical, these well-trained Rus troops will prove it. Near Katagert, Eric's patrol clashed fiercely with a Rus assault team. After a brief encounter, realizing victory was out of reach, Eric was forced to order a retreat. The Rus, however, merely made a probing attack and did not pursue their enemies. Coincidentally, the commander of this Rus assault team was Ivar, who happened to encounter the exiled Hvitserk. Fate brought the two brothers back together. Ivar was puzzled by Hvitserk's plight, and Hvitserk felt awkward, never imagining that his rescuer at his lowest point would be Ivar, whom he had long sought to kill. On the return voyage, Hvitserk slept soundly against Ivar, as if his fear of Ivar had transformed into dependence. Ivar, too, was conflicted, unsure why only Hvitserk had such a deep bond with him. Despite their on and off relationship, they eventually reunited, yet Hvitserk's return still brought Ivar genuine joy. On the other side, a subordinate who had traveled the Silk Road informed Bjorn that those were the Rus people who had sheltered Ivar. The legendary vastness of the Rus lands, their abundant resources, and strong populace, now augmented by Ivar's cunning, were deemed too formidable to resist. Thus, Gunhild suggested seeking peace with Harald, hoping that an alliance might offer a sliver of hope. Although Bjorn harbored deep hatred for Harald, he acknowledged the wisdom in the proposal and sent Eric as an envoy to broker peace. Since Harald became king of Norway, he has become more and more arrogant, and after he recognizes Eric as an outlaw, he doesn't give him a chance to speak. Moreover, Eric was a subordinate of Bjorn, whom he most envied.
I know you for Skogomar, an outlaw!
Yet, Olaf kept persuading Harald, convinced that Eric must have urgent intelligence, otherwise, he wouldn't risk his life to deliver the message. Harald keeps Olaf with him because he knows he has a different kind of intelligence, so Harald agrees to give Eric a chance to talk. After persistent and patient persuasion, Harald finally agreed to ally with Bjorn, on the condition they jointly defend the capital. Meanwhile, Ivar brought Hvitserk back to Kiev. After learning that his mother's murder had been avenged, Ivar finally fulfilled a long-held desire. Later, Oleg held a military parade outside Kiev to show Ivar and Hvitserk his true strength. Witnessing the disciplined ranks below, Ivar was astonished. He had never seen such a vast, regular army. No matter how highly regarded Harald and Bjorn were, they could not withstand such a force. Ivar was summoned to the hall by a maid. As the curtains slowly parted, a vision of an angelic woman unfolded before him, leaving Ivar utterly transfixed. Clearly, Katia was deliberately trying to please Ivar. Having heard his ex-wife was blonde, she donned a golden wig for the occasion. Ivar's emotions were a complex mix of longing and guilt towards Fritis, but he had no desire to become involved with Katia. Faced with Katia's advances, Ivar could only mention his own imperfections.
You know I can't.
Of course you can.
Unexpectedly, Katia's words echoed those of Fritis, yet Ivar no longer wanted to live in the shadow of his ex-wife's memory. Ivar removed Katia's wig and thanked her with a passionate kiss for her efforts. Nevertheless, Ivar helped Katia put on her coat and declined her advances. A few days later, Katia explains to Ivar why, that she made a pass at him because she's on Prince Dir's side too. Since Ivar had saved Dir's life, she wanted to show her gratitude in this manner, but the cautious Ivar doesn't make any statement. After all, Katia is Oleg's wife. Ivar knew Oleg was watching their every move.
I think I'm falling in love with you. And I don't even know who you are.
Meanwhile, Bjorn had arrived in Vestfold and, after assessing the enemy situation, they immediately formulated a defensive strategy. Essentially, The strategy involved setting up defenses along the coastline. The problem was that Bjorn didn't know where Ivar would land, so they had to include every possible landing beach in their defenses. It was a massive undertaking, and nearly everyone was involved. During this process, Harald took a liking to Ingrid. As a king, Harald was not short of women, but he had a penchant for taking what belonged to Bjorn. Harald is not only jealous of Bjorn, but he is also displeased with Bjorn's achievements, which he believes are due to his father being Ragnar.
We have just met, and already you want me to betray my husband.
The best fruit is always forbidden.
At the same time, the pregnant Gunhild was also working on the docks. Eric admired Gunhild for her generosity and capabilities, continuously making advances toward her. Eric suggested Gunhild rest to preserve her pregnancy, but the strong-willed Gunhild did not want to be seen as weak. Eric, in his efforts to please, stayed close to Gunhild. However, the strenuous work caused Gunhild distress, leading to a miscarriage. Gunhild felt she had let Bjorn down since he now had no sons. Hoping Ingrid could soon bear a son for him, their conversation was overheard by Harald, who was eavesdropping outside the door. Yet this wasn't the focus. What mattered was that Ingrid, after spotting Harald, deliberately provoked him with her words.
You are the true king of Norway.
Ingrid's statement clearly implied that Harald was inferior to Bjorn. What Harald could not stand most was being looked down upon by women. He couldn't understand why Bjorn seemed to have everything and why the women preferred Bjorn over him. Thus, Harald finally unleashed his fury. Before Ingrid could inform Bjorn, the Russ fleet arrived. The invading force was estimated to consist of several hundred warships and tens of thousands of soldiers. Only Thorkel the chief had answered Harald's call. Will the Vikings be able to withstand the Russ invasion? And will other chiefs come to their aid?
We will meet again, husband.
This is the Kievan Russ version of D-Day, and for Norway, it's akin to the Twilight of the Gods. Prince Oleg of Kiev is set to lead tens of thousands of soldiers in an invasion of Norway, ruled by Harald. In this battle, Ivar will confront his brother Bjorn, making it yet another conflict among kin. Before the battle began, the brothers engaged in a heartfelt dialogue. Ivar remarked that the gods relish seeing them fight, so they obliged. Bjorn accused Ivar of betraying their father's faith by bringing Christians to fight their own people. Ivar firmly believed that their father took him to England because he saw him as the heir. However, Bjorn countered by saying that Ivar was their father's last choice only because everyone else had rejected him. Though this was the truth, it also proved that all the other sons had abandoned their father except for Ivar. Ivar believed that he alone truly carried on their father's legacy, and the bond between him and their father was unmatched. If Bjorn is not convinced, then he will have to prove it with victory.
And you are wrong, Ivar. And I'll prove it.
The battle then commenced, with the first wave of Russ soldiers storming the beach. Compared to Viking longships, the Russ warships were clearly more advanced, capable of transporting not just numerous soldiers but even horses. The Russ cavalry used grappling hooks to pull away the Vikings' defensive barriers, effectively tearing open a breach in their lines. Once a gap appeared in the thin defensive line, the enemy surged in like a tide. From the scene, it is evident that the Vikings have extended their defensive line quite long, and such a setup requires a significant number of warriors. Due to the lack of manpower, their defenses were only long but not thick. As more Russ troops landed, the Vikings' first line of defense was nearly overwhelmed. On another front, Ivar and Oleg led another fleet to attack from the river. Gunhild, commanding the river defenses, ordered the Vikings to ignite obstacles on the river. However, this was futile as the Russ soldiers easily jumped onto the pontoons. While fending off the Viking soldiers, the Russ sought opportunities to cut the ropes holding the barriers. Soon, They severed the ropes, and the Rus warships broke through the defenses. Seeing the defenses about to fall, Gunhild charged onto Oleg's flagship, followed closely by her warriors, attempting to strike at the enemy's command center. As the saying goes, capture the king to defeat the enemy. Gunhild's tactic was sound, but she overlooked one fact: the flagship was filled with elite fighters. Oleg, his lieutenants, and Ivar Hvitserk were all on board. Although Gunhild was valiant, she was no match for Oleg. Oleg knocked Gunhild's weapon away and wounded her thigh, while Ivar was poised to throw a dagger at her from above. To save her life, Gunhild had no choice but to jump overboard and flee. Thus, the Rus easily breached the river defenses. Bjorn had not stationed many troops here because the river led only to the back of the town, bordered by impassable cliffs. So, it was understandable not to allocate many forces near this natural barrier. However, Ivar always managed to exploit the enemy's psychology, anticipating that this spot would be lightly defended. Thus he aimed to make the impossible possible. His plan was to scale the mountain and catch the Vikings off guard from behind. Finally, the beach's first line of defense could no longer hold because Harald had failed to fulfill the promises he made to other chiefs to win the election. Therefore, Harald's call went unanswered, leaving them significantly outnumbered by the enemy. Will the second line of defense be able to hold off the invading Rus? Find out in our next episode.